I just realized I was talking and I hadn't officially started this. So repeat everything I just said. Welcome. This is our last SLEIS question and answer session. And thank you to the 13 of you, 14 who are out there. I hope you can hear us. If you have any issues, there's a chat feature where you can get our attention. We are recording this, just so you know. We have posted the last 2 SLEIS question and answer sessions. The March 1st one has the question log associated with it too. So you can look at the questions that are covered and see if there's something that might be of help to you. And we will try to get this video posted as soon as possible after the webinar is over. Introductions. Some of you may have attended our previous SLEIS question and answer sessions or have a long history with us trying to help you through this process. But my name is Catherine Williams. I also have Kate Hewitt here with me. We are your official employees at DAQ, I guess regular point source inventory staff, and we are more than happy to help you through this process. We appreciate you watching our SLEIS training videos that we've linked in most of our emails. Those can help save a lot of time. We have 560-ish facilities that are reporting this year. I just checked this morning, we have 69 that have submitted, yay. So that means we still have 500 to go and 15 days until the due date. So things are gonna get a little crazy between now and then. So please watch those videos, do all you can to get yourself through as much of your report as possible, but then definitely reach out to us when you're at a stopping place and can't figure out what to do next. We also have Sally Lloyd here. Sally is our intern. We just got great news yesterday that she gets to stay on through the end of the year, which is huge. She was only supposed to be here through the end of June, but she's going to be here and help us QC all these reports and make sure that the data we are getting is really good. She started at the beginning of January and has learned an incredible amount in the last 3 months. I actually was just telling her yesterday, I don't think I would be able to speak so knowledgeably about emissions in 3 months. So good job. We have said that the things that are best to start with Sally are your login, if you're having trouble with your password or your security questions, or the final step of submitting. Another great thing that Sally can help you with is if you didn't operate at all in 2020 and just need to enter zeros, Sally can help you through that process. It is pretty quick. You just need to know what to do. But like I said, she's becoming very capable. So if you can't get Kate or I, please try and contact Sally. She's super helpful. So our format today for the question and answer session, we are literally just going to answer your questions that you have. If you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the questions section. You should be able to type it in. And then if we're answering your question, we may have a follow-up question, and the best way to answer that follow-up question is to put it in the chat because it will come up. Otherwise, I just see it on our control panel at the bottom of all of the questions and may not notice that you actually addressed the follow-up until the end of the webinar. So that's not that helpful. So anyway, yeah, put your question in the question box, use the chat feature to follow up. And you can go ahead and start asking questions right now, get them in the queue, and we'll start answering them as soon as we're ready. I am sort of the person that's going to monitor the questions, and then Kate's going to share her screen and show you how to do a lot of these things in SLEIS. And that is about it. The other thing, we're going to start with just some things like sort of frequently asked questions that we've been coming across as we've been helping people through these reports. So Kate is going to go ahead and give you, I think, 5 little quick tips in SLEIS, and then Sally's got a few things that she wants to add too. And following that, then we'll get to the questions. So Kate, go ahead and take it away.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Awesome, okay. So the first thing that we're gonna start with is, oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong notes. There we go, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into this 2019 report. So the first thing that we're gonna talk about is having in process emissions, a throughput and or emissions. So one thing that we've noticed a lot in the QC process is if you have 0 in this throughput box here, that, then we would expect to see something in this emissions box. So if you have, or sorry, I said that backwards. If you have 0 emissions in your throughput tab, we would expect to see nothing in this emission box. The opposite is also true. If you do have something in your throughput box, we would expect to see something in this emissions box, and it's going to calculate. There we go. So zeros go with zeros, non-zeros go with non-zeros. We have had a few exceptions to this. If for whatever reason your throughput combination is not available and you've already talked to us about this, then go ahead and put 0 in this box and put what the actual throughput is down here in this comments box. And then we would still expect to see some sort of emissions, but you're obviously not going to be using this 8_2 number. We would expect to see probably like a 2_0, and then you just hard enter your emissions right here. So that's our first thing. 0 throughput goes with 0 emissions. Non-zero throughput goes with non-zero emissions most of the time. Another thing that we're going to look at is control devices. This is an error that people are getting a lot. Let's look at this fabric filter baghouse. This is a great example. I don't know how many of you have seen our PM error, but basically SLEIS gets very unhappy if your PM numbers don't add up. So if PM filterable is higher than PM primary, SLEIS is going to say that doesn't make sense. PM filterable is a subset of PM primary. If your condensable and filterable don't add up to your primary, SLEIS is also going to get mad because those are the 2 subsets of primary. So something that's going to be pretty helpful with this, particularly with that first issue, is if you're entering a control device right here, you want to make sure that you have all of your pollutants included. So I want both the primary and the filterable of the PM. If I have something like wet suppression or a baghouse, most of the time those are going to be the 2 that control a lot of PM on site, I would imagine. And we also want to have the PM25, both primary and filterable, in here as well. And they should all have the same control efficiency most of the time. If you're not sure what the control efficiency is, go ahead and contact us. We do have a list of EPA guidance on control efficiencies, like default control efficiencies. But obviously, if you have site-specific information, that's going to be preferable because it's not just an EPA default. The next thing we're going to do is go over the operations tab. That's something that a decent number of people seem to be having trouble with. So here in the operations tab, this is a good example of what it would look like if you didn't submit anything. You're going to basically put in any standard start and stop time. Doesn't really matter because you didn't actually operate. And then zeros in all of the rest of the boxes. If you did actually operate, let's do maybe 8 to 5, just sort of regular business hours operation. How I usually like to do this is, number 1, if you have anything in there already, you're just going to remove it. And then let's start with the weeks per year first. So I think that this is a more logical way to go through this, is how many weeks per year to start with. So if you operated the entire year, you're going to put in 52 weeks. If you operated half the year, let's put in 26 weeks. So let's pretend that we operated the whole year, 52, average days per week. How many average days per week did you operate during those 52 weeks? Let's say you operated 5 days per week. How many hours per day would I operate during one of those average days? Well, considering that I put 8 to 5, let's do 8 hours. Give everybody a lunch break. Then these are automatically going to calculate and give you hopefully the correct numbers for your operations. Let's do one more example where we're looking at maybe a half-time operation, and then we'll also go through the monthly operations. So again, if I have anything in here already, I'm going to delete everything out of these 5 boxes just so that I have a nice clean slate to start with. Nothing's automatically calculating and then is going to get mad when I try to save it. So let's start with if you're only operating 6 months out of the year, that's going to be 26 weeks, right? During those 6 months, though, I am operating still 5 days per week. So I'm going to put in 5 days per week. And during those 6 months, how many hours am I operating during that time? It's still probably going to be 8. So this is going to give me a more accurate actual hours per year, just based on the fact that I'm operating 6 months out of the year, but still full time during that time. So if you notice, it's half of what it was before, as it should be. So then let's look at the monthly operations. These are not going to be what % of that month did you operate, but it's going to be throughout the whole year, how much of your operations happened during that specific month. So let's say we're doing a summertime operation. Let's start in June, and let's do 20% in June. I'm gonna hope that my math works out in the end. 10% in July, 15% in August, 15% in May. What is that? 50, 60% so far. Let's just throw in 40% in September. Make it nice and even. So we want all of these numbers together to add up to 100%. This would be similar if you operated only in 1 month, you would put 0 in the rest of the months, and let's just make it July, you would put 100% in July. And that should save, and that should be what your operations looks like. If you have any more questions about operations tab information, go ahead and put them in the chat. Another issue that we're having is that sometimes SLEIS is not properly rounding up PM for whatever reason. So if you select 8_2, you have an emission factor, you have some sort of specific throughput that's giving you a repeating decimal at the end of what your estimated emissions should be. It's not rounding properly. So it's just saying 99999. And then with the PM errors that are pretty common that I talked about before, you're getting an addition issue because some of them are rounding properly and some of them aren't. So if you are having one of those issues, I would identify which pollutant is having the issue rounding the 99999, and then select engineering judgment and just round the number yourself. So if before you were seeing something like this, what you're going to do is round that 9 up to just a 0.1. And then you should be able to save it like that. Everything should add up together. And as long as it's just 1 PM, we're probably going to know that that's what the issue was. If it is multiple of them, it'll be helpful if you make a comment right here in this comments box. So the only other thing that I have for frequently asked questions that we're getting a lot is the difference between post-control EPA emission factors and pre-control EPA emission factors. So both of these numbers come from EPA. The post-control is going to be done with research for like after a control device. So if you're looking at a stack, it's going to be stack testing from after the baghouse. This one is going to be looking at a stack test without a baghouse or before the baghouse. So the only thing to note here is that if you have a control device in SLEIS and that has an accurate control efficiency, like we talked about before, those percentages that you put in, if you do want to utilize those, you do have to select this number so that we don't just use the EPA default value that they give. So that's going to be like an average of multiple people's data for control devices for their control efficiency, whereas this is going to have more site-specific information, hopefully, based on that control device that you have in SLEIS. So that's all the information that I have for our Q&A. Sally, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, so I just have 2 quick things. Just when you're registering for SLEIS in our Google form, the first thing is if you are registering for more than one facility, you can enter those in one box or in one submission. You don't have to submit every time or register every time for different facilities. The other thing, if your account is locked or if you forgot your password, you don't need to re-register. You can just reach out to me or even SLEIS@utah.gov. And that's it.
And with the lock, if your account gets locked, if you can't reach Sally, just call any of us, because we know that's really frustrating and you cannot fix it yourself. So you do have to get in touch with one of us to get you unlocked. And the reason it locks is usually just because you enter the wrong password. I think you only get 3 tries to get it right. So the other thing I've seen is, I'm just going to throw this one out here too. We've been seeing a lot of times people are having issues with like not being able to log in for some reason, or at the final step where you're trying to enter your security questions, that you think you're entering the right question, but sometimes the browser will put in something that's been auto-saved, like even if you're trying to answer something else. If you're finding that is happening, like that you just cannot get, you're like, I know this is the answer to my security question, and it's not working, try a different browser. So if you're using Google Chrome, try Firefox. Last year, or sorry, not last year, but in 2017, we found the Internet Explorer was definitely the browser that had the most problems. And I think Firefox is the one, I don't know if we ever found a problem with Firefox. Google Chrome was almost perfect. So, and I don't really have any data for Bing. So we'll see what happens with Bing and if people are successfully getting reports submitted there. But yeah, try a different browser if you're running into issues with autofill possibly. Okay, thank you, Sally and Kate, for all of those great FAQs. We have a lot of questions, so let's get started. Our first question is from Nikisha Scoville, and the question is, when you put count of equipment in emission unit tab, does that reflect in process equipment? It seems like some of my sites list each crusher out and some just list one crusher, and then there is a 3 in the equipment count. Which is the correct way to handle this?
Keisha, that's a great question. So I'm just going to show everyone, for anyone who doesn't know, we're talking about in this emission units box, in this additional information tab, there is an equipment count option right here. You can enter how many pieces of equipment you have right there. And then that just lets us know that you're looking at multiple pieces of equipment. Also, I would like to point out my dog has decided to make a cameo. So this number doesn't actually affect any of the calculations if that's anything that you're concerned about. So once you get to the unit process level, this is not going to multiply by anything. If you are trying to report multiple pieces of equipment under one unit process, then you need to do that manually. You need to like multiply the throughput by however many pieces of equipment you have, or add them all together. The more general answer to your question is that we are happy to have you report either way, either with multiple pieces of equipment under one process or each unit noted out individually. One thing that I will say though is that if the pieces of equipment don't have similar release points, Nikisha, I know that you're probably talking about a sand and gravel operation, so something like a crusher would be fine, something like a screen would be fine. So if you have like a fleet of crushers and screens, that's totally fine to report together. But something like an engine where they might have very different stacks, we would probably want to see that reported separately, because if you're looking at this stack information over here, if you're putting in different values for the height, the diameter, the temperature, the flow rate, that's something that's going to be very important for modeling for us. So if the pieces of equipment are very different in that aspect, I would report them separately. Hopefully that answers your question.
She actually, I think, has left, so hopefully she'll get the answers to these on our video. So, okay. All right, next question is from Michael Smith. I have added a new emission point. When I exported the data, the new emission point was not in the CSV file. I would like to use the CSV file as a quality check to ensure I have entered all required data. Should the new emission point be updated in the exported data?
Another great question. So, Michael, I'm not sure if we already talked with you about this issue or if it was someone else, but one thing that we did notice is that these reports, so total emissions by emission unit and by release point, they are pulling, or at least one of them was pulling information from what we see on our end, which is the master report. So that's an issue that we had with our vendor. We haven't gotten any updates on whether or not that's fixed yet, but we can follow up on that and let you know when that will be fixed. Hopefully very soon.
Okay. And just a little side note from what Kate said about the master level, what you see in your report level is everything that's come from the master level. So when we published your report, it took the information from the master level and put it in your 2020 report. And now when you make changes, you'll submit your report. Once we have gone through and made sure we're satisfied with everything, we will promote it to the master. And so you will change what is at the master level. So if you add an emissions unit, we will then see it from now on once we complete the quality check of your report. We aren't able to see anything you've added though until you actually submit your report. Just some things to know. All right, next question is also from Nikisha Scoville. What are some examples of cases where there was multiple release points for unit processes?
This is definitely a very rare circumstance. I can probably think of 2 facilities that have this actually happening, but that's just going to be if you have a piece of equipment that literally has 2 different stacks. If you're looking at a fugitive piece of equipment, definitely not going to have multiple release points. It's generally just going to be something that has multiple stacks. And that is going to be reflected in the unit process level. I'll just point out where this is. So in this release point apportionment tab, that's where you would add another stack. Let's make it rice stack 2, and then adjust these percentages here. So let's say that 50% of the emissions went in each stack. You could also do, I'm sure, 75, 25. Again, not sure how realistic that is. Just having 75% and 25% go into different stacks, that seems difficult to control. I would imagine more commonly that it would be a 50-50 situation. But this is an option for you if that literally is how your site is organized, that one piece of equipment has 2 separate stacks.
Okay, awesome. All right, this is another one from Nikisha. This is a great question too. Should a baghouse be listed in both the release points and as a control device?
That is another great question. We would definitely expect to see it in control devices. Right here, you'll have this fabric filter baghouse, all the pollutants that it's controlling, and it should be attached to a unit process. Sometimes what we see is that people do stack testing on that piece of equipment, and it really is all the emissions together of a bunch of what we consider separate pieces of equipment. So maybe you have one room that has a lot of pieces of equipment in it. It's open, there's air flowing, and it's all going up into a baghouse. Then sometimes we would expect to see a baghouse at the unit process level and at the release point level as well. Because really what we're looking at is all of the emissions from that baghouse. Really, they're coming from all of the pieces of equipment in that room. But however you want to name things and denote things that make sense for you and hopefully will also make sense for us, you're welcome to do it however it makes sense for you. You are obviously also welcome to name this baghouse as long as all of this information is correct, if that helps you remember which stack that is and what it corresponds to as well. But it's definitely helpful from our end. The most detail that you can add to a description at the release point level. Control devices are usually pretty self-explanatory, but also at the emission unit and unit process level. But you're welcome to organize it however you would like.
Okay, great. All right, next question is from Kevin Eldridge. What do you choose for an emission methodology for fugitive emissions from dropping material on a pile using AP42 emission equation? I'm thinking he's talking about like a conveyor.
That's what I would imagine. So let me see which unit I have. I have obviously demonstrated shutting these down so much that they're all getting very confused. So I'm just going to change this SCC to be hopefully accurate to what you're talking about. So I'm looking at 184.168, and I'm going to change that one. Let's call this drop points, and then I'm going to change the SCC. Let's see if I can remember.
And Kevin, if you're not talking about a conveyor, go ahead and chat me what you are talking about.
Sure, let's go. Well, I know that there's one that is specifically drop points. You're really testing my ability to remember what this SCC is. Let's stick with this one for now, and then if you want to put your specific SCC into the chat, that might be even more helpful. This one is generally good. I know that it has emission factors, but it seems like you're talking about one with an equation. So I'm interested to see what that is. But we're going to put in the tons of material. Let's just say you use 10 tons. I'm going to skip over the operations tab for now. And then let's go into the emissions tab. And so what we're going to do is, since I already have information here, I have to clear it. And then I'm going to select 8_2. That's generally going to be what you'll use if you want to use EPA emission factors. These are connected with specific SCCs, which is why I ask what the SCC is, just so that I have the same one that you're talking about. But I'm going to select that, say, okay, yes, this is the emission factor that I want to use, and then SLEIS will automatically calculate those emissions for me. So again, go ahead and enter in the chat what that SCC is if you do want to talk about it specifically, but otherwise that's the general process that you're going to follow. Since you are, yep.
I was going to say, will you just show with your cursor where they can find the SCC information on the right side?
Yes, yes. So when you're in process emissions, the place to find your SCC when you're already working on it is right here on the right side. You have all your facility information, and then we're looking at this current record right here. So under SCC, it's got that 8-digit code. Sometimes it's going to be a 10-digit code if we're looking at mobile pieces of equipment, and then it has the description of what that piece of equipment is. So industrial processes, mineral products, processing, screen, convey, handling. Another thing, since you were talking specifically about equations, that's where these supplemental calculation parameters are going to come into play. So something that you might need to enter for your drop points, maybe it's percent silt of the material that you're working with, silt loading, let's see, drop height, that's going to be very common if you're looking at a conveyor as well. So you might have to enter some of these pieces of information. If you do, after you select this calculation method 8_2, you'll get, and try to save, then you'll get an error over here in the process tab. Click on that, and then any supplemental calculation parameters that you need to enter information for, they'll be highlighted in red. So it'll let you know I need information about the drop height or about the wind speed. So hopefully that answers your question. Put in the chat if you have any follow-ups.
And that was an FAQ that Kate shared last time in March, was that SLEIS is very good at telling you what else it needs to know. So, I think a lot of people get daunted by this supplemental calculation parameters and think they need to enter everything. You usually don't have to enter anything. So when you click save, SLEIS will give you an error message if there's another piece of information it needs, and then it helps you track where to put that information. Okay, moving on. Okay, under the process emissions section of the report, this is from Joey Nix. For the annual throughput field, the data I input into that field, does it need to be the calculation or just the runtime? He's got an example. I am reporting emergency generator runtimes. The throughput calculation is in horsepower hours. So do I need to, do I put the runtime in hours on my generators for 2020, or do I need to figure out horsepower hours and input that into the annual throughput field? Thanks.
That's a good question. So in this annual throughput number, the units of whatever you're putting into this box should match these units down here. So the first thing that I would suggest doing is looking at your drop-down options for this throughput combination. It sounds like you have horsepower hours, which is great. So you'll select horsepower hours, and then you'll put the horsepower hours of that unit into this throughput. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward for you to calculate. You should have the horsepower of your engine and then just multiply that by the hours and it should be good. Another thing that is good to know is if you do have any specific emission factor that's calculating based on hours and there isn't an option for hours in this throughput box right here, there's no hours in the throughput combination dropdown. As long as you can calculate out to an accurate number of hours in this actual hours per year box, if you select in here, let's say you're using a site-specific emission factor, if you select hours, let me find it, it's alphabetical, hours right there, then you can enter your emission factor here and it'll calculate based on the hours in that operations tab. But long story short, you're going to put in your horsepower hours into this annual throughput box.
Okay, all right, next question. All right, this question is from Regina Harris. It says, may just be a clarification. I have historically entered MMBTUs for my boiler. It looks like this year it's making me enter combustible material throughput and then a comment for the units for that material. Seems like this is new for this year. Am I right? And the answer is yes. So Kate will walk you through that.
Yes, so this is very useful when we're trying to figure out what we call point source subtractions here at the state. This is definitely a very technical thing. But the main thing that you need to know here is that we would expect to see maybe your million cubic feet or your cubic feet if you're burning natural gas, or 1,000 gallons if you're burning diesel fuel, for example. But basically, the idea is when you're entering million BTU as your throughput information, we do still want to know how much fuel was combusted as well. So you would put, let's say, 100 if you're looking at million cubic feet, and then you would just enter MMCF for your unit right there. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions about that.
Okay. All right, we have another question from Kevin Eldridge. It says, how do you enter start time and end time for a facility that runs 24 hours a day?
Good question. So what I would do is enter start time as 12 o'clock, and then end time you can either do 11:59. That's not an option in the little drop-down menu, but you can edit it, type it in, or I would just select with the drop-down menu 11:30 p.m.
Okay. All right, another question from Nikisha. If you are noticing that an emission factor that is pulling up is in metric when it should be English, should we just adjust that by using 8.4, or should we let you know?
If you're seeing a unit discrepancy, please let us know. That's going to be something from our WebFire table, which none of us were the individual builders of. So if there are any issues with that, we definitely do want to know.
Yeah.
If you are just trying to get a report submitted, though, of course you can change it to 8_4, but ideally we'll be able to fix it, and then you will be able to submit it with the correct information in there.
Okay. Another question from Kevin Eldridge. Do we need to account for emissions from trucks on site?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So the answer to that question is yes. One thing that we would expect to see is a 10-digit SCC over here. And then Your two options for throughput combination are either going to be hours or gallons. If you're using diesel, that's definitely the most common fuel that we've seen. You'll put in your operations information. Obviously, there are no, at least to my understanding, there are no requirements on your permit that make you track your usage of mobile pieces of equipment. So your best guess is fine. And then in this emissions tab, we do have emission factors under 8_2 for PM10 primary, PM2.5 primary. Oh, it got mad at me. Because I don't have throughput in there. VOC, CO, NOx, and SO2 for all of those mobile pieces of equipment. That's not billed on. We only use that information for modeling purposes.
And I'm just going to throw in some like big picture items here. When Kate's talking about modeling purposes, what she's talking about is like for our state implementation plans. So the information that you are entering in the system does have a purpose. We use it, like she said, for billing if you're a Title V facility, but we also use it to help us figure out how to stay in attainment with the national ambient air quality standards that the EPA sets out. And so, as you know, we have some issues with particulate matter and we have some issues with ozone in this state. And so what happens is we have another section that coordinates the efforts to put these plans together. And Kate puts all of the data from point sources in, and so all this information is very helpful to help our modelers figure out where the pollution is coming from and how we can get it down to a point where we can meet standards. So that's one big picture thing. And the second big picture thing I was thinking of is a lot of times we get questions about like, well, that's not on my permit. Do I really have to report that? And the answer is, like, it may not be on your permit, but what we need is every emission source that you can think of from your point source. And so if that means mobile units, if that's dust from your road, those things are important because, again, it's taking into account the entire picture for that point source, which really helps us to know the entire picture of what's happening in our state so that we can meet those standards. Any other thoughts on that, or should we move on?
That was good, Catherine. You summed it up nicely.
Oh gosh, thanks. Okay. All right, another question from Joey Nix. Regarding the process emissions start and end times, our generators only run for maintenance or emergencies. What do you suggest I put in for this type of operations?
Another great question. So I would just put in your maintenance runtime. So if you run it for half an hour on the days that you run it, maybe you only run it once per month. This is just a whole example that I could do honestly right now. But let's say you run it, let's just go through it. Let's do it right now. Let's say that you run it once a month for half an hour on that particular day of the month that you run it. So let's say you do it starting at 7 p.m. and then it ends at 7:30 p.m. Let's start with that average weeks per year. It's going to be 12 weeks per year because there are 12 weeks during which that piece of equipment operates. During those 12 weeks, it's going to operate just one day. And then during that one day, it's going to operate for half an hour. And that'll give us the 6 hours that we would expect to get. So half an hour once a month, 12 divided by 2, 6. But I would just put in your standard time. Obviously, if it's operating for an emergency, that's outside of your quote unquote standard time. So if you do have any issues with calculating this actual hours per year correctly because you did run it over that standard time, maybe let's say that it ran an additional week that was outside of your, there we go, that was outside of your standard start and end time. I would still leave that standard start and end time, but let's say that if we're just averaging out as if we're still only using those 12 weeks per year, 1 day per week, but it operated a couple more hours, maybe let's make it 1 hour per day. That'll double your actual hours per year, So maybe you operated it 6 hours during an emergency situation. This definitely gets a little tricky when you do have something like an emergency generator that you aren't operating on a super regular basis. So if you have specific questions about how to get this actual hours per year or actual days per year to a correct number, go ahead and email us. We can help you with the math to try and figure it out, because there are a lot of different ways that you could get to the same numbers.
Hey, thank you. I just thought I found some follow-up answers from one of our participants. Do you remember the question about the conveyor? And you wanted the SCC. He's giving us the he's giving us the SCC. So
Okay.
I'll wait till you get to that screen. And I think some people are having trouble finding the chat feature. If you are, just send me a question and then I'll chat you back. And you might be able to see it better that way. This is a complicated webinar platform, apparently. All right, the SCC is 30501041.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a different, like a bottom dump thing. He also says the trucks would be trucks that are coming into, let me read this again. They're coming in to be loaded and then leaving the site.
Okay. So it looks like here, all that we have is one emission factor. So it's not going to be an equation, apparently, just based on the SCC. So I would still just select the 8_2 methodology for that. And
Okay.
you're probably only going to need to report PMs for this, since we're talking specifically about dumping.
He brings up another good point, like this truck is owned by another company. And so, but we ask that you account for the emissions, right? Yeah, so the emissions need to be counted since it's at your facility. Okay, oh wait, I think we might have one more. He says, for these trucks, I am counting the particulate matter from on-site paved and unpaved roads. Yes, that's correct.
And that should be under a different SCC. I would imagine that the SCC would be 30502504. That's the one that has the equations for paved and unpaved roads.
Do you want to show that real quick?
Yes, sure. Let's do it.
It was kind of impressive, just rattling that off.
It's a very common SCC. So it's this construction, sand, and gravel hauling. And this is going to be specifically for the road test. So once it saves, let's go to process emissions. And this is going to be based on the miles that were traveled. So this is going to be for all of your vehicles of a certain kind. So let's say that for this particular truck, it traveled 100 miles total for 2020. So I'm going to select 8_2, and I have 3 different options here. If I hover over the notes, that'll tell me the difference. So this one's specifically paved roads. This is unpaved roads that are publicly accessible. And then this one's unpaved roads on industrial sites. We definitely see unpaved roads on industrial sites most commonly. I'm going to select that, and then hopefully, yep, I'll get an error that says, hey, I need % silt information, the mean vehicle weight, and the precipitation days for 2020. Again, if you don't have any of this specific information on site, we do generally have defaults. They're not going to be super, super accurate, but it will be better than not having any information at all. So let's say that the % silt of the soil is 4.8 and the mean vehicle weight, this is in tons, is 22.5 tons. And let's say the precipitation days, as you can see, it has a decent range here. Let's pick 88 as the number of precipitation days. And then I go back over here, I can click this calculate button, and then it fills back up. So that's going to be how you calculate road dust. And we would do the same exact process for PM10 filterable, PM25 primary, and PM25 filterable.
If they have paved roads too, should they enter like a second process to do the paved roads?
Yes, so that's going to be a separate process because I can only select either unpaved roads or paved roads when I'm looking at those equations. And they're going to have different amounts of emissions. So if you're driving on a separate paved road, you would also need to have the approximate number of miles that were driven on that paved road as well.
Kate, do you want to show people just how to add a second process?
Sure. So I'm just going to add it to the same emission unit. I'm not going to go through the whole process of making another emission unit, but the emission unit ID that I want to add to is 184168. So let's go ahead and select that one. I'm just going to give it the same SCC for the sake of the example. Let's call it paved roads. Since I don't have a control device built, I don't think, a lot of the time you'll probably have water spray to control paved road dust. I'm just going to select not controlled. And I only have stacks right now. You really should have a fugitive release point for this, but since it's just an example, I'm going to select the stack and then save it. And then once that's saved, it'll appear right here. So as you can see, again, the naming of this is not accurate because it's just an example, but I have this paved roads unit process right here. It has the correct SCC. And then if I go back out and into this process emissions box, then I have this paved roads example as well.
Great, thank you. That's a great way, that's sort of a good trick. Like if you have the same, a lot of people do that if they have a boiler that runs on 2 different fuels. You don't have to put the boiler in twice. You can just make a second process to list that the other type of fuel that it runs on. And usually the identifier will be 2. If you're adding like the next process, you must have had other processes somewhere saved in there or something. Okay, I've got one other question in here about if coal crushing occurs inside a building, would there be any emissions?
That's a great question. It's definitely going to depend on the site and how it's generally set up. So if a process is completely enclosed, then we generally consider that that particular process has no emissions. But if you're sending it through something like a baghouse that's going to a stack, like I was talking about earlier, if it's in a room, but there is a baghouse that goes out to a stack that releases into the atmosphere, then that is going to be your source of emissions, that baghouse. And we would expect that you would probably have stack testing for that baghouse for any pieces of equipment that are in that completely enclosed space.
Super, thank you. I have another question that's similar. You answered this earlier, but we might as well touch on it again. Standard end time for an operation has a drop down that ends at 11:30. Is it important to change that to 11:59 p.m. if the unit operates for the full day?
It really is not very important to change it to 11:59. Just as long as we have that it's operating during 23.5 out of 24 hours, that's totally fine.
Okay, next question from Michael Smith. What is the control efficiency for ultra low NOx burners for a natural gas-fired boiler?
That's a great question. I'm going to request that you email me that question because I have a big spreadsheet of the EPA defaults for that, and I'll have to go through and sort through that. So that's not a number that I have at this particular moment, but I can definitely find it for you.
And other places, like if you're having trouble getting a hold of us, and other places you can look for that information. Often when you submit your notice of intent to get your permit, you had to submit a big pack of information, and there is a good chance that the control efficiency for that burner is in the NOI packet. And also you can also search online. So if you look at the manufacturer of the low NOx burner, they often have specs online. So that's another great resource as well. Okay, another question from Michael Smith. You have helped me change the name of our company. However, the additional information tab still has the old company name. I cannot edit the information to match the new company name. I am pretty sure that's one of the fields that only we can change. If you can't change something in SLEIS, particularly at the facility level, it's usually because we have to do it. That's like a state thing. For instance, like if you wanted to change your physical address, we can't do that because that's generally something you have to address with your permit. However, if you let us know, you can send us an email and we will put that in. We have like this master list that reminds us of all the things that we're supposed to do. And so if you email us and let us know that there's something that you can't change that is wrong, we will update it once we upload your facility to the master level. Because if we change it now and then you submit your report, once we upload that to the master level, everything's going to get rewritten. So it doesn't make sense for us to do it now. We just need to wait until we get your whole report and deal with it then. Okay, one last question from Michael Smith. How do I report one emission unit with 3 different stacks? This sounds like what we were talking about earlier.
Yes, that's another great question. So you'll have all of your stacks created here. Just for the sake of the example, I'm just going to create a third one right now so that I can show you exactly how you would report that. I'm just going to put in default values for each of these. And let's pretend that the paved road that I just made has 3 stacks that it's reporting to. This is not a real example, but we're just going to pretend for the sake of the example. So in this release point apportionment tab, you can see that I have 1 stack right now. What I'm going to do is press this add button 2 times so that I have 3 options for my stack. I have vertical stack 1 selected. Let's add in rice stack 2 and stack 3 that I just created. And then we'll edit these percentages like I was talking about earlier. I would imagine that it's all going equally into each stack. So that would give me 33% on 2 of them. And just to get it to add up to 100, I'm going to do 34% on the last one. Save it. And it all worked. If there is an issue with your math, if it's not adding up right here with the stack percentages, SLEIS will let you know when you try to save.
Okay, we just have one last question so far. So if you're out there and you have additional questions, go ahead and put them in the questions section. Let's see here. How would you estimate the operating percentages per month if you have an emergency generator? This is from Amanda Richard.
Another great question. Okay, so let's go into process emissions and operations. So again, this is going to depend on what exactly your process is. So if you are operating just on maintenance, if you're just trying to maintain the generator and let's say you're running it half an hour once a month, then if you click on this question mark right here on monthly operations, this will give you an even distribution for each month. It does account for the length of each month. So 31-day months have 8.5%. Obviously, February, being a very short month, has much less than everybody else. But what we would expect is you to put that information here into these boxes over here. If you did operate during an emergency situation, what we would expect is just based on the total number of hours that you operated. Let's do a little math here. Let's say that you operated 100 hours for the month and 50 of those hours happened during September, right? There was a windstorm in September and that made it so that you had to operate extra hours during that month. So if you're operating 100 hours for the full year, you're going to put 50% in September and then evenly divide the rest of those 50 hours by the remaining 11 months. So let's do a little more math. 50 hours, oh wait, 50%, let's say, divided by 50% divided by 11 months, that's going to give me 4.55 for each remaining month. And we're going to see if my addition actually worked for that. So let's try and save it. Okay, it looks like it was fine with this calculation here. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just going to be based on how many hours you operated during a given month and how that compares to your total operations for the year.
And just another big picture thing, you'll see there was an error bar. So like when you're completing this, you might think, oh no, I messed up. But what SLEIS is saying, there's a little warning, I don't even know, that little yellow triangle on the emissions tab says, actually that's where the error is. So that means the operations tab saved fine. It just wants you to address something on the emissions page. So those error bars are helpful, but sometimes they can be a little like, what did I do wrong? Okay, we've got another question from Nikisha Scoville. Does there happen to be typical stack specifications that we can refer to? We have so many generators that we have not been required to stack test since they move around so much. So getting these specifications are hard to get without going to every single facility with a generator and measuring.
So Nikisha, I assume you're talking about this information here in the release point. That's what I entered when I was making this fake stack over here. These are the default values that we generally enter when we don't know the stack information for a particular stack. So 10 feet tall, 1 foot diameter, 72 degrees, and then 12 actual cubic feet per second for the flow rate, and then it'll automatically calculate this exit gas velocity just based on all of the other information above. And if you want, you can just send me an email and I'll send you all of these default values. But this is just based on like ambient, I think it's relatively slow flow rate. So it won't be super accurate, but it'll be something.
And Kate, is that information ever used in the calculations, or is that simply a modeling numbers?
That's just for modeling. So all of the information in your calculations, that's going to be based off of emission factors and any stack testing information that you do have. That information is just used for modeling to figure out where in the atmosphere all of your emissions are going.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, we're down to our last question again. So if there's any more questions out there, throw them in the question log. Oh, this is a good question. 2020 is a leap year. Do we need to account for the extra day in February?
I'm gonna go with no, simply because it's one extra day. If it's going to impact something like your operation hours, then let us know if you're having trouble with the math, and we can totally help you out. If you operated a lot on February 29th for some reason, that might give you an issue. But generally, I'm gonna say no. We're not going to change like the monthly percentages based on the fact that February has 29 days instead of 28 days.
That was from Michael Smith. Michael, I really admire your diligence with this report. Nice job. That's a good question. Okay, another question from Nikisha. She said, hopefully you haven't already addressed this, but is it conservative enough to assume that all equipment for, say, a crusher, with parentheses, screens, conveyors, cone crusher, etc., receive the total production for that facility? Do you understand that?
I don't think that I totally understand the question.
Okay, Nikisha, feel free to follow up. I think what she's asking is like, if you have an SCC that has all of those things, can you just enter the throughput for the facility once? Or do you need to specify? I don't know how her facility is set up.
Yeah, it's going to depend on how your facility is set up, but most of the time, these emission factors are just based off of that one source of emissions. So if you're doing a screening process in addition to your crushing process, you would need to have a separate unit process where you're reporting those screening emissions, just because EPA based on their emission factors, has separate numbers for each of those processes. So in order to get an actual full picture of what's going on at the facility and how many emissions are being generated, you will have to report both of those separate pieces of equipment. I think you might also be asking about the throughput. Again, please clarify in the comments. But if you are putting all of the crushed material through one, or all of the material through one crusher, then it's just safe to assume that your total annual throughput is going through that crusher.
I think maybe another way, oh wait, here's a follow-up. We aren't required to track how much tonnage went across the conveyor screen, etc. But we do have a total production number from the crusher. So we have just been using that number for conveyors and screens. So I think what she's saying is like, you know, you may have an SCC for screens, you may have another one, or I should say more like you may have a unit process for screens, you may have a unit process for conveyors, you may have a unit process for crushers, and each of those is going to have the same throughput, the entire facility-wide throughput. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, yes.
Okay. If that still doesn't answer your question, Nikisha, let us know. Okay, we have a question from Richard Millett, who we've been helping with the PM error. He asked, have you fixed the calculation problems yet? We have not received official word from our vendor. I think they're very busy because they work with, I'd say 15 or 20 states that are doing these reports. And so they're probably getting a lot of errors. However, we will definitely let you know when we do hear about that error. Another thing, if people are having issues with that rounding issue that Kate talked about at the beginning, where it's like going out to 9999999, if you want to wait, if you have other things to enter, what would be good is like if you want to go ahead and enter all the other pollutants that aren't particulate matter and get everything else done, and then come back and see if the particulate, like recalculate the particulate matter pollutants and see if the problem is fixed. That might be one way to address it. Okay. And otherwise use what she talked about earlier, where you round it up to the next highest number, like 0.1, and try and save it that way with 2_0. Okay, another question from Richard Millett. What emissions do I need for the natural gas microturbines that I have?
Great question. So I'm going to go ahead and change this SCC really quickly. But the general answer is that for all natural gas combustion, right, there we go. That the, I can't type and speak at the same time, that the pollutants are going to be generally exactly the same. So let's go to process emissions, and let's click on this natural gas boiler. I'm just gonna enter a generic throughput, 10 million cubic feet. So we are going to want all of the PMs. So this is PM10, get that emission factor. That was primary. Let's also do filterable. Select it. 2.5 primary, as well as 2.5 filterable. We'll also do PM condensable. There we go. So that's all of the PMs. We're also going to have NOx. VOC. SO2. Carbon monoxide. And then these next two, I say always try. We might not have emission factors for them, but lead. So it looks like there isn't one for lead for this particular SCC. and then also ammonia. There we go. We do have an ammonia emission factor for this guy. Another resource that will hopefully be pretty useful to you is if I go to the home page, we do have a required pollutants Google Doc right here. So this is going to be helpful generally for knowing a generic list of pollutants that you should probably try for a given piece of equipment. So boilers, they most of the time run on natural gas, so I would check this list. Engines and generators, that's going to be for diesel fuel most of the time. Sand and gravel equipment, concrete batching, asphalt plants, paint booths, solvents, cleaning, ink degreasers, mobile piles, roads, landfills, evap ponds, land farms, heaters. We have a lot of different pieces of equipment. This is definitely not a comprehensive list by any means. So if you know that you have a specific HAP that you need to report for a given piece of equipment, or if you've done stack testing and that has an even longer list of pollutants, please report all of the pollutants that you know about. But if you're not an expert, if you're just starting out on reporting your emissions, this is definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, maybe, you know what, we don't have any other questions at the moment, so maybe we could walk through some of those resources on our homepage. We've been putting a few more things up here recently that just kind of when people are asking questions, are like, yeah, that might be a good thing to help explain. The big ones, will you go ahead and open up the hazardous air pollutants? It's like the fourth one down, Kate?
Yes.
Yeah, that one. So a lot of times people have a question about, do I need to report the HAPs? And this is a confusing thing. I'm not gonna lie, it took me a long time to understand it. This is a list of all of the HAPs, or it's like our most updated list of all of our HAPs. So you've got your CAS number on the left side and the pollutant in the second column. You can enter either of those things under pollutant in the emissions tab in SLEIS and they'll come up. And then the third column where it says minimum reportable emissions pounds per year, that is what the exemption amount is. So for instance, this first one, 111 trichloroethane, its minimum reportable amount is 500 pounds or 0.25 tons per year. So if you have less than that of this 111 trichloroethane, then you do not need to report it. But that is at the entire facility. That's not just for one process. So if you have if you've got 250 tons in one process and 251 tons in another process, you are going to have to report it. So that's a good thing right there, and it'll help you, like, as you're reporting your processes, start to understand like whether or not you think your HAPs are going to have to be reported. And I like to use that in conjunction with our rule. Oh my goodness, Kate, would you mind trying to scroll? I put this on yesterday. Utah made a new rules site. It's not quite as user-friendly as our old one, but sometimes people are like, where does this information even come from? Well, we have a rule, and if you come to this page, scroll down to environmental quality and then air quality, and then one more scroll to number 150. Yeah, go ahead and click on that, and then this is our actual rule that shows, we're required to do this, and here's what is required. Section 7 talks about all of the different HAPs reporting requirements. So these 5 right here, you've got arsenic, benzene, I think that's arsenic, benzene, beryllium, ethylene oxide, and formaldehyde. Those are like, as our toxicologist says, those are like the really big ones, the sort of red flags. And you can see their pounds per year are really, really low. So if you have any of these that you know of at your facility that you think you might be emitting, chances are you probably need to report them. Then the second, so that's number 1 under section 7. And then number 2, it says hazardous air pollutants except for dioxins and furans. If you have dioxins and furans, you have to report them regardless. That's how that little section, that statement reads. Then it has several qualifying sort of aspects of the rest of the HAPs. A lot of them, as number A says, is going to be in 500 pounds per year, but then it sort of qualifies the other sections out into acute, chronic, and carcinogenic pollutants. So when you see in that third column of the spreadsheet we were just showing you that there's a lot of different amounts, it's because they multiply these TLVCs, which come out from some manual made by the industrial hygienists. They're multiplying that by a factor to come up with this other exemption amount. So that's sort of like the background of it, but if you follow this, this will help you the most to figure out whether or not your HAPs need to be reported. Another question, let's go ahead and show them our new coding spreadsheet that we made. We made this the other day to try to help people with reporting their codings. I'm going to do my best to explain it. So if you have a paint booth or if you're using a lot of solvents, you can choose to report these in several different ways. One way you could do, where Kate showed you how to make a different process, you could make a process. Like if you only use 3 coatings, you could make a process for each of those coatings. And then you're going to use the calculation method 3_2. And that will ask you for the density of the coating or the solvent, as well as the percent VOC. And it will calculate it for you. However, sometimes like if people are using 20 coatings or, a lot of them, it might be easier to do a weighted average. We made this example spreadsheet so that to kind of show people how to do a weighted average, because it's a little bit of a math challenge. Kate is a math major, by the way. That's why the stuff comes so easily to her. So let me walk you through this. Product code, column A, you're going to put the code of your product. Column B, your product description. So maybe it is top coat. Then C is going to be the throughput. How much of it did you use in the year in gallons? Sorry, throughput units. So did you keep track of it in gallons? Generally, that's how people keep track of coatings. And then D is going to be the quantity. So how many gallons of that did you use in the year? This little calculation that we did in cell D4 is going to be the total gallons for the year. And then we're going to use that to figure out the proportionate density and the proportionate VOC percentage. So in column E, you enter your density. Column F, you enter your VOC percentage. Those 2 things you're going to find on your safety data sheets that your coatings or solvent supplier provides you. And then column G takes the total amount of gallons from cell D4 and figures out how much was used. So you've got 40% of this example 1 and 60% of example 2. Then it's going to multiply that by your density and your VOC proportion to give you the proportion of those VOCs. And your answer is going to be in H4. That is going to be the density that you would enter in SLEIS. And I4 would be the VOC percentage that you would enter in SLEIS. And so obviously, if you have 20 coatings, you're going to need to make more rows. But what you want to do is use the calculations that we've come up with in row 4 here to come up with the totals for density, quantity, and proportion VOC. We also made some HAPs entries over here. And basically for each HAP, you're going to have to do 3 columns. You're going to put the name in, which is column K. You're going to put the weight percentage, another thing that you would get off the safety data sheet, in column L. And then column M is going to be the calculation that it comes up with. And so let's see if I can remember how to explain this. What it's going to do is in column K, you're going to say, okay, I use this, there's this much arsenic. Let's use a really bad one. So there's this much arsenic in this first coating, and then the percentage is going to go in column L. So like there is arsenic in here, but it's only 1% of the total weight of the coating. And then column M is going to calculate that out. Now, row 3 will take the arsenic from your example 2 coating, and you're going to put in the weight percentage from that safety data sheet. It comes up with the total tons, and what you're going to get in cell M4 as you do this is the total amount of arsenic that is in all of your coatings. So again, this is just an example of how you would use the calculations, and that was a lot of talking, but it might help you. It's just a tool, another resource. Do you two have anything else you want to add about those things? Nope. Okay.
If you have any tanks calculations, this emissions tool, EPA tanks is retired. Basically, it's not being supported anymore. So this is a really good replacement for the tanks tool. You'll enter basically all of the same information about your tank specifications in order to calculate the VOCs from that given tank.
Oh, yeah, and I guess we should just show you the other thing, those SCCs, those are all just spreadsheets that we have that have emissions factors in there. So for instance, like non-road mobile, SLEIS isn't going to have emissions factors for you, but you can find them in those spreadsheets. So let's see here. This is our mobile one, and you can, let's see, you could sort it by, I would like to look for maybe, I'm gonna look for some lawnmowers. Should we look for some lawnmowers? Kate's gonna show you, you can put filters in here, and she's gonna go ahead and search lawn and garden equipment. And what it's gonna pull up is all of the SCCs that have lawn and garden equipment listed in them. Then you can scroll through and kind of determine which one is most accurately represents the equipment that you have at your facility. And you could also say, okay, there's only certain ones that actually have emissions factors, so I'm going to stick with one of those and make it work. That might be a way to use this resource. Okay. We have, looks like we have a few more questions. Let's go back to our questions. Is there a new rule that requires an ozone emission statement that is due each year? Do you have our rule still pulled up, Kate? Yes, and I think it's section 9 is the ozone emission statement, and it does begin this year, but nobody really needs to worry about it this year because you're already reporting for us this year. Let's see if we can try and explain this though. I want to say it's for facilities that report over 25 tons of NOx and VOCs, and
that's going to be specified in subpart 3, subpart 5. So let's scroll up to that. 3.5. This applies to stationary sources located in a designated ozone non-attainment area that have the potential to emit oxides of nitrogen or VOC greater than 25 tons per year.
Great, thank you. So the ozone non-attainment areas is going to be the Wasatch Front and then the Uinta Basin. So if your facility is in there and you have 25 tons, I'm sorry, was it combined or separate? I can't remember. Separate. Okay, so if 25 tons of NOx or 25 tons of VOCs, you will have to start reporting. But again, everybody's reporting this year, so it doesn't matter. And then next year we will get to that. And we're not, yeah, we still have a long way to go. Okay. Oh, I think this is the same question. Is SLEIS used for ozone emission inventory reporting? Yes, and sort of twofold. Yes, you're going to do the ozone emission statement, and also, like Kate's been talking about with the modeling, we use this data to help us with our ozone SIPs. Oh, and Richard Millett likes your dog, Kate. That's Phoebe. He's like an honorary member of the point source emissions inventory team. Okay, all right, we do have time. This is from Nikisha again. Says, I did have to jump off when you were answering my earlier questions. Could you touch on the equipment count and if that is reflected in the process emissions tab again? Do you mind going over that again, Kate?
Sure. So let's go back to SLEIS. So for anybody who missed it, we're talking about in this emission units box. If I look at this boiler, for example, in the additional information tab, you could have an equipment count right here that is not empty in this example. That's not going to impact any information in process emissions. It's not going to multiply your emissions by anything. If you are reporting a bunch of pieces of equipment together, then you'll have to manually do something like multiply your throughput by whatever number of pieces of equipment you have, or you'll have to sum all of the throughput for those individual pieces of equipment to be able to report them together.
Okay, everyone, that is our last question. So, but we still have 40 minutes of this webinar. If you have any other questions, go ahead and throw them in the question log real quick. Otherwise, we're just gonna, I will be on here. You'll see my face the whole time, but I'm gonna stop recording and, but be here in case anyone comes up with additional questions. For those of you that are gonna sign off, thank you so much for listening and participating. And we really appreciate all your work on this. We know that this is a lot, it's a lot of work for facilities, and we get that, and we're happy to help as much as we can. There's just a lot of you out there, so we'll do our best to keep up. Okay, no more questions, so I am gonna stop recording this for right now. We have 3 minutes to go on this webinar, and only one person is still here. So I am going to go ahead and end this webinar. Thank you all for attending. And if you're watching this recorded, if you missed it, just let us know if you have any questions. We are happy to help, and just do your best. You got 2 weeks. So thank you again. Have a great day.